Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shelley Lowe. I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard University Native American Program. We are going to get this program started. I'm going to turn it over to our Faculty Director, Professor Joseph Gahn, to get us going.
Thanks, Shelley. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event that was jointly conceived and planned by the Harvard University Native American Program, or HUNAP, and Native American alums of Harvard University, or NAAHU. It is, as you have been made aware through our advertising, Harvard University Native American Program's 50th anniversary this year, starting with the American Indian Program back in 1970, shifting over to the Native American Program around 1990, finally becoming the umbrella university-wide program that it is today around the turn of the millennium. We usually start with an acknowledgement of the fact that Harvard University sits in the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. I should briefly introduce myself as the faculty director. I've been doing that for just a little over a year now. I'm an enrolled member of the Fort Belknap tribes, Aani Grovan in particular. On my dad's side, I'm from the Azure and Brisboe families. On my mom's side, from the Ghana, the Crazy families. I'm also an alum of Harvard College. I transferred here as a junior in 1990, graduated in 1992, and was very pleased and privileged during my student years to be part of the Council of Native American Students at Harvard that really pushed for making the Native American program become a university-wide endeavor. I returned 2 years ago with a faculty appointment as of 2018, jointly in the anthropology department in arts and sciences and in global health and social medicine at the medical school. I'm actually a psychologist and an interdisciplinary social scientist, and took over, as I say, the faculty director of HUNAP as of about a year ago. So again, welcome to this event. Let me introduce to you Dr. Emily Van Dyke, Sixica, who's a graduate of the college and also got her MBH here and is a physician. Emily is a founding board member of NAAHU. She served 14 years on the NAAHU board and as president for 4 years as well. She helped to launch NAAHU's Mentorship Program in coordination with Native Americans at Harvard College to try to link alums and college students in a program that we're very excited to see coming off the ground even as we speak. Dr. Van Dyke studied medicine at the University of Washington, spent a lot of time working with Indian communities and serving them during that period. She recently completed a 3-year term on the Harvard Chan Alumni Leadership Council, as well as the School of Public Health Alumni Engagement Committee. And she now runs a college prep educational consulting business in Seattle, Washington. So for the remainder of this program, I'll turn it over to Dr. Van Dyke. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited and grateful to have this opportunity to talk with these distinguished alumni today. They've been inspirations to me for many years and probably to many of you. Of course, we'd hope to be able to gather in person with HUNAP to celebrate their 50th anniversary back at the powwow and for quite a few events subsequently, but I'm grateful that you've all joined us today to gather remotely as a community. Shelley and I talked about the title Synergy Circle because each of us in our separate roles may be able to support and enhance the work that others of us are doing to achieve all that we want through alumni involvement. So it's my honor to introduce Dr. Patrick Johansen, who is a tireless advocate for rural and minority healthcare and for Harvard's recognition of its ties to American Indian history and current affairs. Beginning as an HAA elected director in 2006, he has an extensive ongoing record of service to Harvard, including 9 years on the Harvard Chan Alumni Council and 8 years on the Harvard Club of Seattle, Sweden board. It's also on the Harvard Club of Seattle, so both are true. Of Cherokee, African American, and Swedish descent, as a student and faculty member, he devoted countless hours to the most vulnerable, completing the Commonwealth Fund Fellowship in Minority Health Policy and serving as an instructor of social medicine at Harvard Medical School. He was integral to ensuring the representation of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the Nipmuc Nation, and the Oquina Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead in ceremonies commemorating the 350th anniversary of the Harvard Indian College. He also facilitated the introduction of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Health Advisory Committee and petitioned for the conferral of a posthumous degree upon Joel Iacoum's class of 1665, one of the first Native Americans to matriculate at Harvard. Dr. Johansen has been recognized with numerous awards, including the 2019 HAA Award. He is an associate professor at at Washington State University's College of Medicine, and also serves with me on the Harvard Club of Seattle board. And he's got so many accomplishments that it leaves me breathless. So over to you, Patrick.
So thank you for that introduction. Thank you and HUNAP for giving me the time to be here and to present today. I am currently sitting in Coast Salish territory in Seattle, and I want to do that acknowledgement from here, where we still have sunlight. But I do want to move to my presentation, and I do want to acknowledge, if I can, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen if you can see. Let's see here. Can everybody see? This is actually a monument from Plymouth, Massachusetts, which commemorates the 1621 signing of a treaty between English settlers, also known as the Pilgrims, and the Wampanoag people. And 2020 is actually the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. And as we consider this 50th anniversary of the context, of 50th anniversary of HUNAP, I think it's also important to recognize the context in which Harvard University is located in, as it was founded shortly after the landing of the Mayflower. And I think it is an opportunity to, and I'm speaking as a physician and a public health practitioner, to think about 400 years of colonization and impact, and how do we heal from that. And I do want to share a slide from South Africa. I just wanted to take a minute to look at this one. And let's see if it'll move. It's not moving. Oops. How do I move it? There we go. Because as we consider our respective roles, think about how other societies with traumatic colonial pasts that permeate the present move forward in a way that recognizes Indigenous people. And I think that is one of the motivators why I got involved in the Harvard Alumni Association, because we have a purpose to serve American Indian people in our own written document. And the other piece of it is a sense of place. We are in the Massachusetts territory. So let me see if I can, next. And I do want to say a little bit more about myself in terms of why sense of place and recognition of history are important to me. This is my grandmother, Nellie Kelsler, and this is the latest edition of her family line of Cherokees from North Carolina. This is my nephew, Asher. And Grandma, as an Indigenous woman who also had African ancestry, growing up in Western North Carolina in the 1920s and 30s, had to put up with a lot. And what I'm trying to tell you is my story about why I care about recognition for Native people. That's really the point of this. But just shy of her 17th birthday, she gave birth to my uncle, Larry. And in her town in Western North Carolina, they had a tradition that the mother who gave birth to the first child after the stroke of midnight was featured in the local newspaper and received all kinds of gifts. And my grandmother, who gave birth at the segregated hospital, gave birth a few minutes after stroke of midnight. And the thing about it was too, I guess she was just shy of her 17th birthday, so 16-year-old teenager giving birth. And she was really looking forward to this. But guess what? No journalist showed up at that hospital. They only covered the white hospital. And so when they made the announcement the following day in the newspaper, Uncle Larry's birth wasn't recorded. And she knew that she gave birth to the first baby after midnight. And that always stuck with her for the rest of her life. And I think finding out while I was studying at Harvard that there was this tremendous history that had gone acknowledged, it kind of made me tap into, this is, we need to bring awareness to it. And the other family members I want to acknowledge are my parents, and that's my grandmother with my mom and dad. And I want to say something about the importance of sense of space, because when my parents got married, they actually had to wait for the anti-miscegenation laws of North Carolina to be lifted. My father's a Swedish immigrant, and he said, oh, why don't we just go get married in Sweden? And my mom's like, we go back millennia here. We're going to get married here no matter what. And they got married under FBI protection, and they were the second legal interracial marriage in the state of North Carolina. But it tells you something about the importance of roots and place. And I think that brings us to the Northeast. And this is a map that's been provided by Lisa Brooks. I want to give her credit, Dr. Professor Lisa Brooks. But it tells you, it shows you where Harvard University is located. And so I think wherever we go as Native people, we have to recognize where we're at and who are the people of that land. And on top of that, Harvard has a written statement, a written document from 1650 that talks about how the university is there to conduce to the education of English and Indian youth of this country in knowledge and godliness. So by location and purpose, this institution is to serve Native people. And we know that two of the first students, Tiamak and Joel Iacooms, they came from Martha's Vineyard, and here are their signatures. And we also know between Caleb Tiamak, whose portrait is featured here, and Tiffany Smalley, there were 346 years between graduations, more than 3 centuries. And in between that time, there was not a very progressive view of education. Harvard substituted having Native students at Harvard to sending missionaries to Indian communities. And this is what the first author of a Native American author of an autobiography had to say to the Harvard Board of Overseers back in the 1830s about one of the ministers that was sent to them. If the white man desired the welfare of his red brethren, why did he not give them schools? Why has not the state done something to supply us with teachers and places of instruction? And isn't that ironic if you consider the purpose of Harvard? I do want to mention the Harvard Alumni Association here and the context of local communities, because I think we should listen to our elders who are in the community, but I also think we should also listen to younger people. One of the students, Anthony Johnson, he said to me a few years ago, and I can't remember what year he's from the college, but early 2000s, I think. And he said, you know, Harvard hasn't respected the land on which it's founded, nor the charter. And I thought back to what a Wampanoag elder, a tragic irony that this Wampanoag elder presented to me a few years earlier when she said, she said, well, you want to hear about Harvard? And I said, yes. And she said, well, they built that school on our land for us, and then they didn't let us in. So, you know, that gives us room for improvement, right? And things to work with. And before I get into advocacy and specifically Joel Iacoom's degree, I do want to say something about what we can do with each other as alumni and students. And I think one of them is support. Several of the students in this picture, Tiffany Smalley, Tommy Miller, and Tia, they're alumni now. But one thing that alumni can do is support students when they are doing things of great importance. And Kelsey, who's not pictured in this photo, was one of the students at the time who spearheaded the building of a WE2 in Harvard Yard. And when alumni learned about that, we came together and we said, wow, this is really something that we need to recognize and honor. And so we came together, and honored the students for their work. And I also think there is room for alumni to support each other through NAAHU and through the Harvard Alumni Association. And for instance, when Erica Scott, I think who's one of the co-founders of NAAHU, I mean, when she's gonna run for election again, let's look at ways to support her, you know? Because she ran for public office in New Bedford. I do wanna recognize also that, actually, if we go back to this frame, I think there is a way that we can strengthen the charter by engaging local artisans and local experts. And so if you look at the frame of that image of the Witu, it is wampum inlay. And it was made by this Wampanoag tribal member in the back, Ms. Berta Welsh, who lives on Martha's Vineyard, and who also did the inlay for the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian. And so I think when we think about community and supporting students, also ourselves as alumni, also look at the community broader than that, the community in which the university is founded and how you can engage them. And there's also alumni. When Tobias became the first male from his community to graduate in more than 3 centuries, we also recognized him with a chair that was engraved with Caleb's name. And I guess my point is, it is a support mechanism. And I think I'm speaking from somebody who's been in academia and in what we call PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and Harvard is one of them. And I think when we can come together as Native people with a shared experience, like Harvard, and support ourselves through that experience, it can make things less lonely also. And I want to get to advocacy now, because that's one thing that I've been involved in. And here you see myself and Kelsey at Emmanuel College, which is John Harvard's alma mater. And Kelsey, I think, was a student in Oxford, and we went to the annual John Harvard dinner, and we handed over a copy of the letter that Caleb Chisholm wrote to his benefactors in England, just to say, hey, you know, there's this rich history, and I think it's hanging somewhere in a prominent place in Emmanuel College, but there's also 2 strands of white wampum beads in there. But I think it comes, but part of it is, you know, part of the first step, I think, when you are at an institution like Harvard that has this history, it's raising awareness of it, and in ways that you can engage people around a cause. And so I just wanted to point that out, that the engagement also to promote Native issues and to engage with each other does not have to just take place in the continental United States, also in different settings across the world. And I recognize that my presentation is dated, okay? I think I'm the oldest one of the presenters, and this is all pre-COVID, and Ethel and Kelsey can talk more about how you engage in this virtual landscape. And the other part for advocacy is tribal leaders. And to our right, we have somebody who was the former head of state of the Aquinnah Wampanoags and who's also an alumnus, Tobias Vanderhoop. But we also have Cedric Chip Cromwell, who is chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and his wife, Cheryl Fry Cromwell, who's a former tribal counselor, as well as the executive director of the Commission of Indian Affairs, and a former Harvard staff member, Dr. Judith Sanford Harris. And in moving agendas forward, like getting Joel Ayakum's his posthumous degree, it was critical to engage local tribal leadership. And I think as a matter of respect, whether we're at Harvard or I'm sitting in Seattle, you know, when appropriate, engage with elected officials in the land that you're in. And specifically if it involves their ancestors and an institution that is founded on their land for them, as pointed out by one of their elders. But then there's also family. And when we went through this process to get the posthumous degree, the first thing we had to do was to get permission from the family. And in the middle, you see Joel Ayakum's great, I don't know how many great nephew, his oldest living relative. And we actually called up the Mashpee tribal office and they gave us the name of the oldest living relative and his contact information. And, you know, we drove down to meet with him to ask permission to pursue this, and he agreed to it. And then the tribes, both tribes got behind it, because while Joel Ayakum's came from the island of Martha's Vineyard, his family is enrolled in Mashpee. And so 2 tribes involved in this. And I think, you know, the fact that it took us a 7-year-long petition to get the posthumous degree, the fact that it coincided with the graduation of the next citizen from his community, I think larger forces is at work there, however you want to phrase it. But I guess my point with all this is Harvard University's charter and the Harvard Alumni Association is a vehicle by which you can serve Indigenous communities. And one thing that I do not want to miss here, because they're not pictured, I've focused on tribal people from Massachusetts in this, but there are non-native allies who move things along behind the scenes too. And I think that's equally important to mention. I do want to close in saying other ways in which you can get involved in the Central Harvard Alumni Association is through your local Harvard Club, wherever you may be. And one thing that's happening through the Harvard Club of Seattle is we are putting on a symposium where we're going to talk about Indigenous slavery in New England. And it's really interesting because something that isn't discussed a lot and was not very acknowledged when there was a ceremony for the slaves of Wordsworth House is that Titus was Native American. And actually, according to Dr. Margaret Newell, who will be presenting at our symposium, in the early 1700s, the majority of slaves in New England were Indigenous people from New England. And so this would have been typical of the picture that day at that. And so what I'm saying is there is more to do. There is more recognition to do at the university in different ways. And actually, Titus is mentioned in a tribal resolution that both Wampanoag tribes sent to Harvard to live up to its promises in 2016. And it says, whereas within less than a century after Mr. Cheshire Makanayakums graduated, Harvard enslaved people of color, both African Americans and Native Americans, of which one of the most currently publicized example is that of Titus, an enslaved Native American worker in the household of Harvard President Benjamin Wadsworth. And so the communities are aware of him as well. And so with that, not pictured in this is our Shelley, Joe Gahn, and other people who from HUNAP, Jason, who have supported the symposium. But I really want to thank you for your leadership, and this is a lot of work to pull all this together. So thank you.
And thank you, Patrick, so much for these many years of leadership. And every time I talk to you, I learn more nuance and information. So I'll have my hat, and as soon as we actually can celebrate another Harvard-Yale game, preferably beating Yale again, I'll wear it again together. So it's also my pleasure to get to introduce Ethel Billie Branch, who holds 3 degrees from Harvard, from the college, and also she got a JD and MPP in 2008. She served with great distinction as the 11th Attorney General of the Navajo Nation from 2015 to 2019. And that was work in which she oversaw an 88-member staff and worked with numerous outside law firms as she fought for the Navajo Nation's legal interests. Branch led the nation's litigation and public relations response to the Gold King mine spill, which contaminated the San Juan River with over 3 million gallons of acid mine waste. In December 2017, she joined the filing of a federal complaint challenging President Trump's revocation of the 1.35 million acre designation of the Bears Ears National Monument, designated that by President Barack Obama. Ethel also worked closely with the state attorneys general for Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and coordinated prosecutorial matters with the U.S. attorneys for these 3 states. In 2019, she rejoined the firm Kanji and Katzen, and I believe she helped open and lead the firm's office in Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm also personally very grateful for her work on the Seattle Human Rights Commission as co-chair. And we still see the evidence of her work today in active Indigenous Peoples Days celebrations every year in Seattle City Hall when it's safe to do so. And also, I remember showing up at the Center for Public Leadership as a new Zuckerman Fellow and seeing her picture and be like, okay, well, she's led the way. This could be a safe space. So I've only just begun to touch on the things that Ethel has done, including, I'm hoping we'll hear from her a little bit on the amazing work she's been doing to support Navajo and Hopi families before, during, and after the huge surge in cases that they faced there. It's been inspirational, and it's amazing work, and I hope she'll continue to teach us about all of the lessons she's learned from that. So Ethel, over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Emily. Yeah, just a brief update on the COVID work that we're doing. We're transitioning from just being sort of a mutual aid group to a nonprofit relief group. Right now focused on COVID response. This started out as just like a crowdsource funding project to help out a few families, to provide them with the things they need so they could isolate and be safe from COVID-19, knowing that our elders drive an hour or 2 hours just to get groceries, and seeing things flying off the shelf in mid-March when COVID came to Arizona. And we want to make sure our elders especially, had the things that they needed to be safe. And so now it's grown into this much larger thing. As of last week, we had provided over $3.8 million worth of direct relief to Navajo and Hopi families. We've served, over 38,000 families. Every week we bring up $100,000 to $200,000 worth of direct relief items that we're handing out. Next week, we're starting to, for the first week of the month and third week of the month, provide PPE at shopping centers so that community members have an increased access to PPE specifically, particularly as we go into the cold and flu season. We're always happy to take donations, obviously. I can put the link for our group in this chat room. But that's been really incredible work, and is really just the beginning of some rebuilding work that we want to do in our community to take on some of these longstanding challenges that led to our community being so vulnerable in the face of COVID-19, because climate change is still here, and that poses just as formidable threats to our community. So we'll be working on things like our next huge initiative is to undertake development of community centers in each community that would provide like an indoor market space, and then access for community members to IT resources, as well as a library and restaurant spaces. So anyway, that's a little bit about the stuff that I'm doing outside of my normal life, I guess. But I've been really honored to serve on the HAA. I've been with them for a little over a year. That year seemed to fly by really quickly. But of course, part of that was absorbed by COVID impacts. So it's been interesting just learning about the HAA. And our first year we were encouraged to just kind of like watch and see what was happening around us and learn how the HAA functions. which goes against my natural tendencies. but you know, I did that, and it's interesting. I mean, I feel like, you know, when I was campaigning, and part of the reason I was elected was to be an advocate for certain communities and for certain issues, from the alumni to the university. And then now that, you know, I'm part of the Alumni Association, you know, the perspective of the association seems to be more about, you know, how we can be good advocates for the university and the association with the alumni. So it's interesting. So I'm trying to balance, like, how do you, you know, how do you do both in a good way that brings benefit to both parties. But when I was campaigning, and you know, shortly after being elected, you know, some of the things I wanted to work on, and I still plan to pursue this, was the development of like Native American alumni groups at the state level, or with Navajo Nation. You know, we have lots of great Navajo alumni who are actually here at the nation, here or near the nation. I see Tim, who's dialed into this, and Lee is also very close. But it'd be really great to be able to discuss, you know, at a tribal level, like, what can we do in terms of connecting Harvard's resources with our community, and like, how do we build that channel? I was actually just in discussions with Monty Russell, the president of Diné College, and we started, you know, talking about, like, well, how do we make Diné College a feeder for Harvard? And certainly, I know Tim said NTU. I mean, I'd love to think about, how do we make our tribal colleges a feeder for Harvard? Because you know, my perspective as someone who was born and raised in Indian country, I feel like the people who, the value of Harvard for me personally is to be able to take the resources I've gained through that affiliation and bring those back to my community to enrich life for everyone here. And so I'd love to think about how to do that more, either at a tribal level or at a state level. Because we, you know, we also have really great alumni here in Arizona, and I'd love to convene folks for, you know, really cool curriculum exercises, like, you know, speaker series, things like that, and really strengthen that alumni network at the state level. So I, you know, I've been in communication with Emily about launching this, and I'm terrible. I need a secretary to pin down my calendar and, you know, set aside the time for those meetings with Emily to think through and to talk with the NAAHU alumni, because Alice, who I noticed is also on this call, Alice was actually the HAA president last year, and she's just wonderful. You know, she did a lot to, I think, educate the HAA about just sort of the presence of Harvard in Indian country, even in a contemporary space. And then also she highlighted Lisa Brooks's really amazing recent book about the women leaders, Indigenous leaders in New England. So very happy to have Alice on this call. And, but, you know, I feel like, yeah, you know, we need to figure out how to bring those resources home, because, you know, that's kind of like the flip side of the charter, right? And the charter was Harvard. I did my senior thesis on the history of Native students at the university. And it was a founding mission for the university to educate the, quote, you know, English and Indian youth of this country. And I focused a lot on how at a time that was very vulnerable for the university, you know, the Europeans had just secured a foothold in the Northeast, and resources were slim in the US, and the founders of Harvard were running out of money and resources to build the city on the hill and to build Harvard as the new Oxford and Cambridge of the New World. And so, you know, they used Native American, the education of Indian youth, as a marketing tool to bring more resources to Boston and to Harvard University for the benefit for centuries of just European students. So I think it's time that those benefits flow to the Indian youth of this country. And we live during a time when, you know, one of the excuses early on as to why the university didn't fulfill its charter mission was that, like I remember stories of President Dunster having Indian youth living with him, and he's trying to figure out, you know, these guys haven't received an elementary education. How am I supposed to do anything with them with respect to the university? And I feel like that excuse is gone now. You know, many of our Native youth have gone through, you know, through high school and are able to matriculate at Harvard. And so I think it's time for that mission to be fulfilled. And it's time for Harvard to channel resources to Indian country directly in appreciation for the resources that were channeled to Harvard at a time when it was vulnerable for them. And there's so much nation building that needs to happen in Indian country, and Harvard is well positioned to equip you know, modern day nation builders with the tools that they need to be successful in strengthening our communities. So I really, really want to see that happen. You know, so one of my goals was to find a way to increase enrollment of Native students at Harvard, which is, you know, challenging to do. One thing I'd love to see is a summer school scholarship established for Native students, because I attended Harvard summer school the summer before my freshman year, and that was really helpful at, you know, transitioning me to the Harvard environment, taking some classes and being like, oh, okay, this isn't so difficult, and helped give me confidence to be successful in my time at the university. So I feel like that's a really helpful way to open up channels of Native students to the university. And you know, it's not always the case, but often a lot of the Native alumni of the graduate schools, many of them come through the college initially. So, you know, getting kids into the college and then them feeding into the graduate schools is a really great way of strengthening the base of Native alumni from Harvard. And, you know, I'd love to find other ways to open up that channel of resources. When I was Attorney General, I came back to the law school a number of times to present on various things. It was really amazing because in the role I was in with the nation, people would come to me as professors or students or alumni themselves and say, hey, I really want to help your community. Here are the resources I can bring. And most of those people were not Native alumni. So there are a lot of alumni who want to help Indian country from Harvard. And if we can find a way of connecting them with our communities and our tribal governments, and I think we could have a lot of enrichment happening at the tribal level. So you know, and that kind of did happen in some ways in the 1970s with the American Indian Program. It was a War on Poverty project, an OEO program. And that's kind of how HUNAP started, with this project to bring in a bunch of Native teachers and educate them at the Graduate School of Education and send them back into Indian country and improve our education systems. And that's certainly still something that's needed. That's had a really, you know, there was a similar program that was done with Cuba, and that really helped strengthen their educational system also in the 70s. So, you know, those types of concentrated efforts, I think, also are really needed. And I was very disappointed to learn as an Alumni Association member that the Alumni Association is not really a great source of funding for projects. You know, that's going to require some creativity in terms of finding funding for projects, even for, you know, establishing scholarships for Native youth. But let's see, I think that covers most of the things I wanted to present on. One thing, you know, in terms of my current goals with the Alumni Association, kind of being in the middle of my term, you know, I'm looking forward to continuing to learn the ropes of the association. I love what Patrick has done in terms of pulling more Native people into the Alumni Association. I'm so excited that we have Kelsey joining us. I feel like having a critical mass is helpful. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for educating the Alumni Association members, you know, especially about what we've been speaking about in terms of the history between the university and Native people. So I would love, you know, at this last Alumni Association meeting, we had a little workshop that was basically in like how to become stronger allies and how to have difficult conversations and be an ally to underrepresented groups in that context. And I feel like this kind of builds off of that. You know, it'd be great. In fact, I'm going to reach out to the Alumni Association folks and just ask, like, can we have a presentation on this history? Because it's so important. And I think as people become more educated about it, then they become, you know, allies. And I'm like, well, why isn't Harvard doing something now to pay back Indian people for what the role we played in strengthening this institution at a time when it was most vulnerable? So that, I think that's a fun goal that kind of came to mind as I was listening to Patrick speaking. Let's see. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps everything up. I think, you know, we have some work to do in terms of making sure that we have more Native alumni representation at a lot of different levels, like with the different school alumni associations. And then, of course, the Board of Overseers. Yeah, so I think it only helps strengthen the university and those entities to have the presence of Native alumni participating with those entities, and it of course helps us ensure that resources of this university are oriented back to Indian country. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more for basically all of the things you said. For instance, for over a decade, I've been hoping that we'll have an opportunity to do a summer community service fellowship in honor of Dwayne Clarence Meat, who wasn't able to finish his degree at Harvard. He was shocked when he was on leave, but we carry his legacy still, and he was a remarkable human. So whether it's an SCSF fellowship or maybe there's more power to bringing Native students to campus. I did that too, and it was amazing. It was so affirming to be like, I can do this. I got good grades and I was there and I loved it. Let's go back. So thank you so much to both of you. You have amazing ideas, and I'm really hoping this is the beginning of a whole new set of conversations. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of forge forth, but I hope we have time to talk more about a lot of the ideas that Patrick and Ethel have already mentioned. So our third speaker today is Dr. Kelsey Leonard, who is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. She represents the Shinnecock Indian Nation of the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean, which is charged with protecting America's ocean ecosystems and coastlines. She also serves as a member of the Great Lakes Water Quality Board of the International Joint Commission. Dr. Leonard has been instrumental in safeguarding the interests of Indigenous nations for environmental planning and builds Indigenous science and knowledge into solutions for water governance and sustainable oceans. Dr. Leonard is a graduate of Harvard College, class of 2010, a long-serving NAAHU board member and former president, and was elected earlier this year to serve a 3-year term as HAA elected director. So one of the reasons we wanted you all to talk is that for the first time in history, the first time in our nation, the first time in Harvard's history, we have multiple Native women serving on as HAA elected directors. So Kelsey, please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so thanks to all of the alumni that have signed on this evening for our conversation. I just kind of want to jump right in to being a newly elected HAA director, and for a lot of alumni that are on the call, you may probably be asking yourself, what is the HAA? Like, I generally am familiar with the Harvard Alumni Association. I generally am familiar that they send me tons of emails, but what do they actually do if you haven't interacted with the Alumni Association since graduation from either or any of your schools? So when we look at the HAA Board of Directors, so the governing body for the Alumni Association, the HAA, under the leadership of the Executive Committee and the Executive Director for the HAA, our mission is to empower volunteers to strengthen the Harvard alumni community. So I think that I really wanted to ground our conversation here because I think a lot of alumni, myself included, especially a lot of alumni this year during the election with a few different campaigns that were moving forward, we're really clear of what the role or power or authority of the HAA is. And it really is centered on this core principle at the end of the statement that our mission is to empower volunteers to strengthen the Harvard alumni community. And we can do that in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways that some of the campaigns like Coalition for a Diverse Harvard and Harvard Forward campaign, both of which endorsed my candidacy, put forward in their platforms. But also just to, not to snowball the authority of the HAA, but keep it really focused in that it is about empowering us as individual alumni and communities of alumni. So you also may then be wondering, okay, well, what does the HAA in terms of the organization do, and how do we as alumni and volunteer alumni contribute to the overall mission of the HAA? Well, the HAA coordinates, this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the things that the HAA does. It coordinates and supports over 250 Harvard clubs and SIGs from around the world. It sends out that events newsletter that we often all get in some form in our emails. It also runs the alumni leadership conferences that happen. There are HAA board meetings that happen 3 times a year. And then it runs social media. So if you're looking at any type of like alumni tweets or alumni Instagram posts, they're likely coming from HAA staff. And some of the summer fellowship programs that Emily and Ethel mentioned, those are also orchestrated through the HAA. 2 programs that I'm really passionate about and have been in the past are the Harvard Prize Book Program, as well as the Early Awareness Program for 7th through 8th graders. Both of those programs are kind of a way for us to honor excellence already in our young learners and also introduce them to the possibilities that could be available to them through attending Harvard College or the other Harvard schools. And I think probably one of the ways that everyone connects to the HAA, if not through like the events emails that you get, is through your class reunions. So if you've attended any reunion or you've gotten the emails too and you really want to go one year but you haven't been yet, the HAA is kind of the main folks that coordinate that. And all of the alumni volunteers who are part of the HAA through different committees are supporting this snapshot of work that you see here throughout the year or years of their tenure as volunteers. So again, the HAA, like most things at Harvard, is full of hierarchy and bureaucracy, and there's so many different moving parts, and it's kind of hard to be like, okay, so who is who and who does what? And so I think this graph is really helpful. That's a big part of what my role in this first year as a newly elected director is as well, is to learn about the history of the HAA, get to have a better understanding of who the HAA is, what we do, and share that information with our broader alumni networks, because I think I learned it as I got to be a part of a part of HAA committees, but I think general alumni aren't necessarily always privy to the inner workings of the HAA. So this graphic here just kind of shows you that there are about over 160 alumni volunteers who are directly engaged with the operations of the HAA, in addition to the HAA staff. Of those 160 alumni volunteers, 13 are executive committee members, and then 140 are directors. There are college directors, graduate school directors, club and SIG directors, past presidents, ex officio members, and Ethel's baby, yay! And then there are the elected directors. That's me, and Ethel, and what Patrick was during his tenure as well. So the newly elected directors, because they're staggered terms so that there's never an empty board or all new board members coming on. So you can see me here in the center, but the other newly elected directors are Joyce Zhang from San Francisco, Benjamin Way from New York, Malcolm Marshall from Boston, Michael Lewis, who's based out of Cambridge, and then Santiago Pereira, who is based out of Mexico City. So how did we arrive here? Well, thankfully to a lot of the folks who are on the line here, and then many other Harvard alumni across the world who firstly nominated us to be candidates, or you might have been put on a petition if you went through some other pathways that were available this year. But for myself, I was one of the folks that was nominated through the committee process. And then all of you wonderful folks voted for us through those normally are mail-in ballots, and then we switched to an electronic ballot about a few years ago, and the rate of return on that was kind of and COVID happened and the election got delayed, and then you all voted kind of through July, and here we are today. So it was a very, very crazy time of year, but we made it, and I am super appreciative of everyone's support. And I'll talk a little bit too about not just the wealth of support that came from our Native alumni community, but also some other communities who feel really synergetic with some of the concerns that we've raised. So why are we here as HAA elected directors? What I will be working towards over my term of the next 3 years is really to conduct outreach to our alumni constituents, so AKA all you folks tuning in tonight and so many others. So outreach to me, email me, I'll share my email at the end. If there's some way that you think we could be building a better alumni community, I want to hear from you. We then provide that feedback to the broader Harvard Alumni Association board. And then we also have the ability to work on ad hoc committees, create new projects, build new ideas, some of which Ethel and Patrick have already shared with you. So we can't do this alone. I definitely can put forward some ideas, but I would love to maybe find a way to crowdsource some ideas from our Native alumni to find maybe, just that one light bulb that we want to push forward in the next 3 years. So as a newly elected director, I also wanted to just be transparent. We don't really do a lot in our first year in terms of moving things forward. We do a lot of learning so that we can be effective in our roles. So in the fall, we just had our HAA fall board meeting last week, and we were presented with a lot of information about HAA history, board structure, how the HAA staff work. We try to understand our role and relate that to the broader community. And then we, in the winter, we are working on what does it mean to be an alumni ambassador? And Ethel spoke to this earlier of, we have a certain ability to sort of be a mic for the broader alumni, and also a mic for the HAA, or a megaphone for the HAA, to sort of share out to our constituents and to the broader alumni community what's happening locally at Cambridge, but then also within the HAA. And then hopefully by the spring of next year, I'll be working on thinking through what my or our collective idea or project or path forward will be for my second year, which is the second year is really where you take up a project, or maybe you're doing a project collectively with your other board members who came in at the same cohort as you, and then you sort of transition that project after your third year, so that there's sort of this seamless transition as you exit out of the HAA and new members come on. So for those that didn't know that before, I think I wasn't totally privy to all that information. I wanted to share it with you because hopefully some of you will be nominated to be on different HAA committees or as an elected director, and this information will be of use to you. So what's next for me? I'm going to be working on getting to know some of the other HAA board members and the HAA board as a whole, really trying to better understand and connect with the HAA staff and their roles. As a past president of NAAHU, I was very connected to HAA staff, and I felt like I knew a lot of them on a first name basis, and they were so helpful. But since I was a president, that was about 5 years. I've still been an active member of NAAHU on our board, but I'm looking to sort of reacclimate myself to staff and get to know them and build those strong relationships. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is to get to know our broader alumni and build together so that we can think of ways to enhance alumni volunteer opportunities. And that's where I just want to end with sort of sharing my anecdotal experience of going through the election. And in particular, I had such a wealth of support from our Native alumni, which was fantastic. And I think I just knew that from like how our community is, being a student on campus and already being a Native alum that was active in other Native alumni work. So that was just reaffirming. But I also found this really, really interesting wealth of support because I now live in what's currently known as Canada, in Ontario. So many international alumni were reaching out to me and saying, we're so happy to see that someone who's not in the US is a candidate for the elected directors. And so I feel a real affinity to a lot of our international alumni, especially because I think their experiences of feeling unheard and invisible are very synergetic to what we've been feeling as Native alumni. And I think obviously there's a lot of diplomatic relations there between the international constituents of Harvard and tribal nation constituents of Harvard. And so I think that maybe that might be a path forward for us to think through a bright idea for my candidacy and moving my tenure forward, but just sort of laying the groundwork. So I will say to Bhutni, thank you for sharing this space with us this evening. Looking forward to getting into the Q&A. That is my email that you can reach me at any point in time, kleonard@post.harvard.edu. And I'm also active on Twitter if any alumni want to follow me or DM me on Twitter. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. That was actually really good. That was educational to me anyway. I think there are so many layers to HAA and so many levels of knowledge about what they do and what we can accomplish as elected directors or other alumni leaders. So my first question is about exactly that. And it is that based on, so it is to each of you, Patrick, Ethel, and Kelsey, based on your many years as alumni who are committed to holding Harvard to a higher standard with respect to Native and Indigenous students, do you see any particularly exciting opportunities for this particular moment, and in particular ways we can be synergistic?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I talked about some of those opportunities. I think, finding a way to connect, create a feeder to Harvard for Native students would be really incredible, particularly if we could do that through our tribal colleges. Because, to me, it's about sending our kids from Indian country to Harvard and then them coming back home and enriching our communities. with the resources that they're able to bring from that environment. So whether it's, you know, relationships with professors or other students, or just, you know, exposure to different resources and opportunities while they're at the school. So that's one really important area I think we could do some amazing work in. And then that discussion about, oh, this is my little guy. That's you. Educating the Alumni Association and helping make them more, I think we're in a unique time when people want to know more about what they can do to help underrepresented communities. So I think it would be really great to convert as many of them as possible into allies in this endeavor of connecting Harvard more directly with Indian country.
Great.
And I would echo what Ethel has said. I think that is really exciting about TCU's tribal colleges and universities as a pipeline for Harvard, and thinking about how that could be pitched to the university. And part of that is having representation, having more people engaged in different capacities, whether I think they be faculty or staff at the university, but also represented in the Harvard Alumni Association. So I think that is an opportunity. And I think you're right about this is a time when people are questioning and thinking about what is their role in systemic racism and how can they be allies of historically underrepresented and marginalized groups. And so thinking about ways in which that can be leveraged. I also did mention that Harvard University has a committee on slavery, and I think it's an interesting discourse if and how they will address indigenous slavery and the enslavement of local people who, by virtue of their own governing document, they were supposed to educate, and thinking about what are some maybe there are measures that could come out of that would support educational initiatives. I don't know what they're looking at in terms of what are specific tangible outcomes to support communities that have been enslaved. But that's what I would say. And actually, I do have a question for you, Ethel. If you could just comment a little bit about the summer academy that you were a part of, the summer program, and if you think that is something that has potential to be expanded.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was in like the program for the misfits who were least likely to succeed at Harvard, or have like the most challenging transition to this environment. And so that was really awesome. I took some courses that summer and was able to use those credits towards my degree as well. And that was inspired a lot of confidence, I think, in terms of knowing that I could be successful in the Harvard environment, and it kind of demystified it also, and exposed me to the other students. And so I got a better sense for what it would mean to be at Harvard, because, you know, like Harvard was such a different environment for me, you know, coming from the West, and then coming from a really rural community also, and a really poor community. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. So to be able to have that as a bridge, and what I saw with the other students who were there, just because their families were sending them there, was that it was this really great eye-opening experience for them to kind of like test drive Harvard and gain familiarity and with that environment, and yeah, you know, think of it as a more viable option for them studies. at the college level. So I think that would be really, really great because, you know, that's one of our biggest things is that a lot of Native students who we were trying to recruit were coming from the West Coast, and Harvard is just like such a different place for them. But if they're able to be there and engage with the other students and the faculty, I think that might give us a better chance of stealing those students from Stanford or, you know, schools that are closer to people's families and communities. So yeah, I think it was a really great transition.
Great. So that's Harvard Summer School, right? That wasn't a, yeah. So when I went there, I got a partial scholarship, but we could potentially look into the possibility of, like, if a student qualifies for a partial scholarship, we could fundraise to help with the other, because basically it was half price, which was still challenging for my family, but it made it more accessible. But it might still be too much of a barrier, even if families find out about it in time, even if they do the official financial aid. But I think that's an inspired idea that we could do targeted fundraising to help. Great. So I don't have as many years of experience as sort of an official HAA oriented person as you do, but I remember feeling a certain constraint about there's a certain way we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to rock the boat. We're supposed to be ambassadors rather than changing this institution. So I wanted to ask each of you, those of us who aren't in an official HAA capacity, how can we push in ways that would help you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish during your tenure as HAA elected directors? Kelsey, I nominate you, but it's a question to both Ethel and Kelsey.
Sure. I mean, my tenure has just started, so it's a little in its infancy or nascent to sort of think through, you know, what that could look like in terms of support. I would just say that, you know, I'm here for folks to build out some big ideas that could be HAA led and could inspire, you know, volunteer opportunities for our Native alumni. And I haven't necessarily seen a big pushback around ambassadorship versus change agents. I think it's a really fine line between the two. And I think that that's something that's under discussion right now by the broader HAA organization. So I'm not too concerned with it. I think that there's so many other aspects too of Harvard that require change agents that it's not only and solely can rely on the HAA, which is why I sort of highlighted the top of my discussion with what is the mission of the HAA, because it can only go so far in the level of change it is able to inspire. But well, really, in the level of change it's able to carry out. The level of change it's able to inspire is probably infinite, which is why I think it is important for, as HAA ambassadors, for us to be a bit of change agents, because if we can make that change in the HAA, in, you know, in just our outlook and how we present ourselves and how we are ambassadorial about Harvard's role in the world, I think that that can also trickle down or trickle over to the other governing aspects and governing boards of Harvard. But there's a lot of things that still have to be reconciled in Harvard's past and history that Patrick alluded to earlier before we can have honest conversations about, you know, a path forward.
And I think the stuff that you guys are doing with NAAHU is really great. You know, connecting the alumni with each other and creating a space to discuss how, you know, that subject of like, how do we better connect the university with Indian country? And then, you know, I guess what Patrick's doing also is a really great example of like not really needing like a formal structure to do really cool things. You know, like with your school or your existing network with Harvard, organizing speaking events and just sharing information. You know, with Indigenous Peoples Day becoming so much bigger now, it's such a great opportunity to educate more people and create more allies, and try to transition to a place where things are institutionalized. Like for this year, I did a presentation. I was invited by one of my fellow college alumni friends to do a presentation for Goldman Sachs's legal staff on Indigenous Peoples Day. And that was just like, yes, I will do this. They wanted to pay me, but it was like, I want to pay you. Like, I don't get this opportunity to educate these sorts of people about, you know, Indigenous people and how we're contemporary and what Indigenous people means to me and why I don't think we should be celebrating Columbus Day. Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what entry points individuals have, but just continuing that education. And that's one of the great things about, you know, our community as alumni is people are so interested, like what Patrick was highlighting in terms of that event, with the speaker on the Indigenous slaves and like that story, you know, I'm like, oh my God, this is fascinating. I want to listen to this. But, you know, giving those opportunities to share information and educate people, because there are so many times when people are like, what can I do to learn more or to help? And so, you know, providing those opportunities for people to learn more and continuing their individual growth in terms of awareness of the history of Native people, and not just, you know, back in the 1600s, but even the story of Indigenous people now.
That's great. To that point about sort of basically the synergy of having more than one of our voices in the room. I've been on the Harvard Club of Seattle board for, I believe it's a little over 5 years now, and it's just so great to have someone else who has any idea about the history and present of Native affairs in our nation, the issues on campus, the issues off campus, and somebody who cares about public health. It's like, this is part of why I stayed on this board. And just sort of to Ethel's point about sort of being a person people know they can talk to, you know, like, oh, we can ask this person how to do it right. I think there are a lot of people who want to do it right, but they don't know who to ask, so they don't try. So we got a lot of pushback from people who really want to do it right about, like, how do we do land acknowledgement? Like, what's the script? Give us a script and then we'll start doing it. Alice Hill modeled that for several years, and it was so great. Every time I heard her do a land acknowledgement, I'm like, Alice, thank you so much. It just makes me so happy that, you know, there's acknowledgement that we exist and that there were people before the current people, and it doesn't take that long. You don't give away any of your power. It is an enhancement only. So we have about 10 more minutes, which means we have time for at least one audience question. We have an incredibly distinguished audience, and I'd love to hear from all of you about what you think and what NAAHU can do to further all of these aims. I also, while you're thinking about your one or two last questions, I just want to flag that the Indigenous slavery event that Patrick mentioned, we're working with the Harvard Club of Seattle President, Michael Burville, and the three of us have been brainstorming for a while now about this. We're really excited about it. We don't have a firm date yet, but it's coming up at the end of 2020, possibly late November, early December. So we'll put out more material about that once we have a confirmed date. We also have a NAAHU town hall coming up at the beginning of 2021. And if this conversation leads to ideas that you want to share, you can always bring them to the town hall. Obviously, you can contact me before that too. And we also have, at the top of the event, we're mentioning that NAAHU's got a mentorship program that we've launched. We have 7 students who've signed up so far, and more mentors than that. But I'm still very interested. If you want to mentor, let me know. As we get this launched, hopefully the word will spread and more students could be supported this way. So after that little spiel, I'd like to say the floor is yours, as in all of you. Do you have any questions for our speakers? Because I still have them, but I'd love to hear from you guys.
So Emily, one thing I'm just going to throw out there is I've been in conversation with Bob Manson about a discussion that the Harvard Club of Ireland and the Harvard Club of Boston are doing together in terms of allyship. But it'd be really cool if at least, you know, the Harvard Club of Boston could become maybe a co-sponsor for your event, because, you know, I would think someone in Boston would be super curious to hear this story. It's a great way of sharing that history.
Great. Marlene O'Brien's on the call, and so we could always talk about that afterwards. I can ask more questions if people don't have them, but.
I had a comment to Kelsey's comment about that there are matters that Harvard has to do that deal with addressing its past and how it permeates the present and how it will actually benefit Native communities. And just to comment that, you know, the HAA can be a platform for some things, and there are others that, you know, it might be more appropriate for the Board of Overseers or the Harvard Corporation, depending on what it is. But, you know, as we sit and think about this 400th anniversary and the impact of colonization of Indigenous people across this land, I do think it is a time to reflect upon what can we do that is actually aligned with the mission and that will benefit tribal communities. And I saw a whole bunch of comments about one for about Fort Lewis College. The student population is 45% Indigenous, so that could be another feeder institution. But really, practically speaking, pragmatically speaking, you know, what can we do to, you know, create feeder institutions where people can go back to their communities and serve them in the best of their capacities.
Hi, everyone. This is Mitsui. Thank you, everyone, for presenting and sharing. It's good to see familiar faces. And as Jackie said, this is inspirational. And I've been thinking about, I went there as a grad student. So that's why I mentioned Fort Lewis College could become a feeder institution for grad programs. And at Fort Lewis College, a little bit of history, it started as a boarding school for American Indian students. And then when it was handed over, the government handed over the property to the state of Colorado, a tuition waiver program was established. So that really lends to the high percentage of our Indigenous students here. So I'm thinking about how, in terms of, is there a way or has there been any conversation about creating some sort of tuition waiver? I know that's controversial because I think in the early 90s, there was a lawsuit that was, that emerged based on that. And I'm just thinking about how, since we're trying to hold Harvard accountable to its charter commitment, I'm thinking, is there a way to maybe begin crafting such a request? I mean, we have lawyers, doctors, professional educators, etc., in our alumni. So maybe it's time to bring up that conversation again. Just a thought.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely agreed, and thank you for your comment. I think one of the things we were talking about recently with NAAHU, Native American Alumni at Harvard University, is just how how we might be able to move that particular issue forward. And I think we're seeing there be some movement around tuition waivers in the Ivy League because of the land back research that was done by High Country News team and scholars out of Cambridge University. That I think were based at Harvard at some point. And I think Phil Deloria, who's on the call as well this evening, has been involved in that work. But right now, the work is happening at Cornell to monetize the Morrill Act land contributions that Cornell received and still has holdings over, and get some economic data on how much they've benefited from stolen Indigenous lands to then move forward with the petition for a tuition waiver at Cornell. If that works and they kind of put together a template, I also think that type of research is now underway at Harvard. There's a few folks that are interested in looking at how Harvard also, not through the Morrill Act, because the Morrill Act was done, about 100 years after Harvard already got all of its money, but we just heard about the charter and also the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel and the taking of lands and the way in which resources were allocated to Indigenous students and then not actually given to us or to our communities. So I think there's a growing precedent to create a pathway for a tuition waiver once we have some more research and archival data to support the claims of economic deprival.
I mean, at the college level Harvard provides such a great financial aid program. I feel like we just need to tell kids that this is an opportunity and demystify this for them, and get them to a point where they feel comfortable accessing and utilizing this as a resource. But that's different than the graduate school conversation. As someone who is still paying back my graduate school loans, but that's a starting point.
Well, and I hope too that maybe they've made some changes, but I know even in the early 2000s, 2010s, the Harvard financial aid still had a lot of massive issues in terms of Indigenous students of color, students from lower economic backgrounds having the same level of access. Like they said one thing in terms of eligibility, and then students still left, like they were predatory in terms of loans, and students still left with a lot of loans at the college level, especially students from, who weren't financially savvy or didn't have the family background in financial education to understand, what they were signing. And so I think that that's still something that could be worked on, and maybe that's something that, that we build upon. But I think some of the claims that Harvard lays about, if you're under this certain income, then you are eligible for, free tuition, isn't always as truthful and clear cut as it sounds. And so I think for some of our Native students, especially, like there's also the question that is also predicated on your family having accurate tax submissions. And a lot of folks' families haven't been doing their taxes properly, and if that's not done properly, then they're not eligible for the free tuition cap that's eligible. So there's just a lot of financial literacy stuff that sometimes can make students ineligible when they should be. So I'd love for us to work on that. Oh, and Alice is saying there's no loans at the college level anymore. So yeah, so maybe things have changed, and some of us older alumni are the ones that bore the brunt of those failed policies. But I still, from current students and recent alums, have heard some, just not so great stories about the financial, just the financial foundation of their experience at Harvard.
Emily, we do have one question from Mong. He wants to know how HAA can expand and build bridges and allies with Indigenous peoples around the world, and how Native and Indigenous alumni can help with that.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the question again. How HAA?
Well,
Yeah,
I'll jump in.
go
Oh,
ahead,
please.
Emily. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
The low-hanging fruit that I've got is that you can join NAAHU and push us to think bigger and think more internationally. The NAAHU board is very well aware that we all know each other for too long in a way. Like, it's wonderful, but we need to get more diverse. We want older alumni. We want an alumni from farther away. And whether or not you're on the board, you have a voice. So they really, I've said this before, they can't excommunicate us as alumni. We're not being paid, and we can push in a way that a staff member or an official program may or may not be able to push. So and honestly, I think HAA would totally support our desire to build bridges and learn from each other and educate each other and the HAA back.
And I think, go ahead, Patrick.
And I think one thing too is a lot of things happen at the local club level. And I mean, a perfect example, I mean, it's interesting because one of our speakers for the slavery seminar is Talo Guiden, who is from New England and who is Wampanoag and Pequot, but also descendant of indigenous New England slaves. And he's an elder. And to get him to speak, we're involving his son, who's an elected official with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And I mean, because of COVID, we can't do it in person, but it's, I guess it's kind of raising awareness within our own local club structure of what it takes to engage elder speaker who lives in Rhode Island and the son lives in Mashpee, and just the whole process of going about this in a respectful way, so that he can participate and do this by Zoom. And so I guess my point is, be active and engage speakers and communities, indigenous communities that aren't necessarily traditionally part of your local club portfolio or of the HAA in different ways. And I think you can do that is consistent with the mission of the Harvard Alumni Association. But I would just say, look at creative ways to bring new people into the fold, whether it's at the local club level or at the HAA level.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And it's so hard to know, like, it's hard enough to get people from our communities here in the US to Harvard, to ask, like, how do we get indigenous students from Brazil to Harvard or, India? So, I mean, it's insiders baseball, like Patrick was saying, like at the local club level. But maybe what we could do is, by raising awareness at the HAA level about, the stories of indigenous people here in the US, we can inspire and even just challenge club leaders from other countries to think about, what's the story of indigenous peoples in their countries, and, like, are those kids making it to Harvard? Is there something they can do to help connect those students with resources and opportunities, so that hopefully, it could even be a challenge, like, what countries have sent their indigenous kids to Harvard, and really, pose that challenge to those particular clubs at the country level. That's a really interesting question.
Thank you so much for that question and for all of you being here. We're a little over time, and so I want to respect everyone's time. I also want to give our speakers a chance for really brief final thoughts before we say goodnight. Or good morning in Australia.
I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for joining. This is really great, and I love seeing all your faces. I know a bunch of you from my time at Harvard, and so it's so great to see you, and so great to see Alice here and other folks from the alumni groups that weren't directly involved with HUNAP at the student level, but are interested in what's happening with the program and are here to support us tonight. So thank you.
I would also say thank you so much for the people who are here and many whose faces I recognize. And also want to thank the people who arranged this session, HUNAP and NAAHU, for your leadership. And finally, I would just like to say that representation matters, and I would encourage you to be involved in a way that's meaningful to you. But that's really where the change happens, I think, when you have people from different communities bringing issues forth.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing. Just thank you to all the organizers for putting this together. It's been really great to share in conversation and think through ideas for what the future of Native alumni engagement could look like and hopefully will look like. And so, yes, just keep reaching out. I think if anyone, you're able to take something away from this evening, it's to think through maybe what is your one call to action to engage, either if that's with NAAHU or a local club and SIG, or finding out how your tribal college can be a feeder college, whatever your call to action is. I think if we all do one thing, then we're moving the needle a little bit more forward. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much for your inspiring words and actions. Thanks to Shelley and Samantha and Johan and basically everyone here. You each helped us get here in your different ways. So I'm hoping to hear from you. By all means, push on me to say, hey, why haven't we done this event, or why haven't we asked for this speaker? And I hope to see you all at webinars soon. And in the meantime, be safe during the holidays, and may we all be able to gather again in 2021. But even if we can't, I hope we'll see each other on webinars.
And on that note, it is the case that we did hope to have a gathering that alumni could come to in person at some point, but that's likely not going to happen, obviously, for a time now. But we have recently put together an email list to try reach alums. There's like 1,000 people on this email list. So hopefully you all are here because you've heard from us, but stay tuned. There'll be more virtual things to participate in over the coming year. Thanks so much, folks.
Have a great night.